Good morning. So I think most of you know me, but there are new people, so maybe you don't. My name is Sylvia Skinner. My husband was the founding pastor of Aldea, so I've been around here a minute. And I was not supposed to be your speaker this morning. So you can look at that one way or the other. It's a treat or, oh man. And I was actually Friday night at dinner at a girls' weekend when I found out that I would be your speaker today. It was supposed to be Arlene, who is delightful. Let's hear it for Arlene. We are so thankful to have her as part of our staff. And I'm sure whatever she was going to share this morning was going to be delightful. And unfortunately, I don't know all the details, but I believe a friend of hers passed away, and she left town to do the eulogy and wasn't going to be back. So I'm at this dinner, and I heard a little birdie at the dinner said that this had happened, and I'm like, oh no, although I didn't say no. But anyway, I thought, oh, I know how this works. Jake's on vacation, and he is scrambling. So I texted him, hey, Jake, do you need me to speak? And I mean, we do have a pretty good bench around here because the lovely Michelle, who was just up here, could have also done this very easily this morning. But she was speaking on Saturday, so I thought, well, maybe I should volunteer. So I did. And he calls me immediately. And he's like, yeah, would you be willing to do that? And I said, okay. And he knew I was at a girls' weekend. And of course, he started with, oh, you don't have to do it. Okay, I'll do it. And he says, I'm like, well, what was the topic? I mean, I need something here. And he said, well, whatever the last series was had ended. And I don't think he knew what Arlene was going to talk about. And he was pondering what the next series would be, but, he wasn't quite sure. And whatever it was, I was like, oh, I don't know what I'd say about that. And he said, well, what's been going on in your life? And I'm like, well, I'm at this girls' weekend, and so women, and I spent the whole last week staying up really late every night listening to speeches. And I'm like, women are kind of having a moment here. So I took some time to think about it and just let the serendipity roll around. And you're not going to believe how much serendipity there is as I proceed. But a little bit about the group of gals that I was hanging out with. These are women that I have been in a small group, or I don't know, it was officially started as a small group for years. And every week we hang out and have dinner together and talk and share life. And I love how on, whatever day, we've gone from Tuesdays to Wednesdays. I think we're on Wednesdays right now. And it goes to show how good I am at being connected. But somebody starts the text, and it's usually Mary. And it's usually early in the morning. And there's two Marys, so it would be Mary R. And it's, hey, are we meeting up tonight? And you can almost feel it. Like that's the first thing that pops up. And then people start chiming in. And they are so gracious to me because I'm watching all the texts and I'm watching all the conversation. But, it's kind of, will she show up or won't she show up? But I try to go as regularly as I can. Obviously, I'm still working full time. But I know that on that day, and my husband calls it girls' night. Are you going to girls' night? And apparently, one of the husbands of the gals in this group started a men's dinner as well. And it's not, it's just some of the husbands and some other people that they've gathered together. And I think it's supposed to be called Frank, what's it called? Okay. The disenfranchised, but I renamed it, and now I'm not going to remember. I think I renamed it like the dejected husbands. So we often talk about, well, are you going? Yeah, I'm going. Are you going? Yeah. And so we really enjoy those fun groups together. And what I love about this group is just that these women were all so different. I think we range from someone in their early 50s to our eldest member we were trying to decide last night. She wasn't there. I think she's about to turn 80 or has turned 80. So it's just a whole span of ages and lives and just so much that we share together. But, the other thing, so I was thinking about these women and the impact on their life, and then also about all these speeches I listened to last week. And there was one speech in particular given by this woman, and you all know who she is, who was supporting this woman. And before anyone gets their panties in a wad, I am not going to get political here. I am going to talk a little bit about these two women who just happen to be politicians. And let's go back to the first woman. So I don't remember a lot of the text of her speech, but I was so incredibly moved, and here's the reason why. This woman, it was her turn 8 years ago, right? It was her turn. She had spent a lifetime of service to get to that point in time. And I don't think she was the only one that night that drank a whole bottle of wine, which I've never done before and never done since. But I think she was as surprised as all of us were. The polls kind of made it look like it was going to be her turn. And what was so moving to me was that she did not have to get up this last week and give this speech. I've read about her that, in the very recent past, she has just adored being a grandmother and has, lived a very full, wonderful life outside of politics. I know she speaks at things because every once in a while it pops up, but she didn't have to do this. There are a lot of politicians that didn't come out to give supportive speeches to other candidates that could have had a voice. So I thought it was just so remarkable that she stepped up to the plate, and even though she had been passed over, as many women know what that feels like, had been passed over. And she got up and was gracious, and she selflessly was stepping aside to give encouragement and credit to another woman. And it made me think about a visual that I've often had in my mind and I've shared with other women, and it's a ladder. And so there's two different kinds of ladder. And, I guess this is coming from the perspective of a woman, but it just sort of feels like every man gets his own ladder. And it's only about 5 feet tall, and it's perfectly sturdy, and they can get up there. They can just go right up the ladder. I know that's not true. I know that men also have to work to get to where they are. But it just sometimes sort of feels like that. But then women get one ladder, and you got to share it. And it's 30 feet tall. And some of the rungs are missing or broken, and it's kind of creaky. So all the other women have to kind of support the ladder and help women as they go up the ladder. And we've all, as women, we've all known the women that, they get right up that ladder and they got to work, but they get up there and they sometimes step on the shoulders of the other women, and they get to the top and they've made it. But the most beautiful, gracious women are the ones who get kind of part way up and they realize maybe they've just had to go up that point where there's a missing rung. And they realize there's somebody behind me. And what they do is they hold on with one hand and they turn around and they lower their hand and they raise that woman behind them up. Sometimes to stand on their shoulder, to get above them. And for me, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful picture of how women do that for other women. And they do it all over the world. I think it was Hillary's saying, it takes a village. Is that correct? That's a Hillaryism. And it does take a village. And I think it takes women in a village often. I'm going to tell you a story about another woman. So we have one more picture. This is Shantha. I don't know anything about Shantha. I don't even know if I'm saying her name right, but she's from southern India, and I found her story on the internet. She's 53 years old, and she happens to live in a concrete house in a rural village. Now, that might not seem much to you, but apparently that is unheard of. And not only that, she has a TV, a fan, and a bed. So she's living it up. Well, Shantha didn't get her concrete house and TV and fan and bed very easily. She was born into poverty, and she was destined to live in poverty. But what she did was she decided, I'm going to volunteer for this government office job, and the only thing they're going to pay me is the fare that I need to get on the bus and get to that job. But I know when I go to that job, I'm going to learn something that will make me more successful. And that she did. And while she was in that job, these are my little notes from the hotel paper. They don't give you very much hotel paper either. While she was doing this job, she learned about microfinance. And if you're familiar with what that is, it's where a lot of people pool together and they'll invest a little, and then they'll go to a bank and get some money. And it's usually a very small amount of money to start a business. And that's what she did. For 2 years, it took her to gather 20 women who contributed 10 rupees each. I looked it up. Currently, 1 rupee is 12 cents. And if I did the math correctly, a lot of people know I'm really bad at math, I think that's $24. 2 years to raise $24. And the article talked about how some women would, if they had a little bit of rice left over at the end of the week, they'd sell that extra rice. Or, it was an effort of these women to really raise this very small amount of money. And then once they had the money, you don't just go start the business. You got to get a bank account, and they don't just give bank accounts to women. And so it took another 6 months to convince a bank that they should be able to have a bank account and start the business. And the first business was to buy cows and sell milk. And they were very successful at this. And the bank loved these women because they always paid their bills on time. And when asked, she said, the reason we're successful is because we're loyal to each other. We take responsibility for each other. So I'm sure there were times when one woman needed more and the others gave up a little bit. I'm sure that they supported each other in that way. In 2009, she learned of a manufacturer that was looking to outsource the packaging of its handbags, and she jumped at the chance to set up a new business. And so she found 26 more women to run that business, and they package more than 5,000 bags a week. Now, as a result of this, all of these women were able to contribute to their families' incomes and break free from poverty. Their children were able to get an education, and their lives and their villages were enriched. She could have stopped there. She, who knows, maybe by this time she had her home and she had her TV and her fan and her bed, and she could have stopped, but she didn't. She went on. She went on for the next 15 years after she'd started that business. She's continuing to knock on doors and teach women in neighboring communities how to use microfinancing. You see, Shantha understood the latter. She understood the power of empowering other women. And again, I'm sure at some point she could have said, I've got enough for myself. But she never did that. I'm not sure what I would have done without the women in my life who have reached down to me, have lifted me up, who've helped me, who've encouraged me. And I just want to share a little bit more about that group of women that I've been hanging out with for the last, I was supposed to ask how many years. Do you guys know how many years? Anybody know? At least 10, 15 maybe. Michelle's got her head spinning back there. Anyway, it's been quite a few years, but prior to that particular group of women was born out of I guess you could call it a Bible study or a book study in our other church, the church that preceded Aldea. And believe it or not, I told you there was going to be serendipity. That book was The Artist's Way. And I believe that I joined the book group because my husband was a pastor, and I'm like, okay, I need to join a group. And honestly, I was so busy. I was probably going to school at the time because I was perpetually going to school and working full time. And I read a chapter here and there, but I always went because I love the conversation. I very, very quickly fell in love with this group of women, and they enriched my life in so many ways. But there was one person who brought a friend to this group. And at that time, the church was fairly large. So, I don't know at the beginning that I really paid that much attention to where this woman came from. But I knew that a friend brought her. And I really liked her. Her name was Becky. And Becky was and is funny, insightful, and very honest. And I was immediately drawn to her. And I had this little funny feeling that she was also drawn to me. And we had this connection. And apparently there was this little secret that nobody let me in on that Becky knew, but I didn't know. And one time, this group of women came to my home. And we would normally do it at one person's home. And I rarely volunteered because, I was raising 3 little boys. And my home just really wasn't all that special. And I have always, to be perfectly honest, I've always struggled with my house. I have like house shame or something. And and so, I scrubbed my house, cleaned it up, threatened my children within an inch of their life if they didn't keep their rooms clean or whatever, and felt like, okay, so they all come over, and I'm starting to feel that anxiety, and Becky walks into my home, and she just starts raving. Your home is so beautiful. It's so warm. And I'm like, if I had not been to Becky's house, who has a beautiful home, I would have thought, gosh, what's her house like? because she's just going on and on and on, and there's literally nothing special about my house, but it immediately, from the moment she walked in the door, and I don't think I had shared this with those women, my anxiety, but from the moment she walked in, she knew exactly what I needed to hear. Now, I don't think it was at that meeting that I found out about Becky and the little secret, but when we were wrapping up the study, and I think we were sharing with each other the gifts that, we had received from one another and how meaningful they were to us, that Becky shared her secret. You see, Becky is a pastor's wife. And only the woman who brought her knew that. And I will never forget that moment. And the moment that I fell in love with Becky. I already admired her. I already thought the world of her. But when she shared that, I don't have any words for it. Because you see, Becky is, she's been doing this for a good, probably close to 20 years longer than I had. And I'm sure had so much constructive criticism that she could have given me, because I was pretty much myself in this group. And I'm not a very typical pastor's wife. So, like, I swear, I tell a story, And and there were probably so many times when Becky maybe had to bite her tongue, but she never did. And I was so grateful that I was the recipient of her love and her grace in every single discussion. And she never gave me advice. She could have. Now, I never had the opportunity to see Becky as a pastor's wife. The dear friend that brought her did and knew who Becky was, but I never got to see that until one day I went to Becky's husband Hal's memorial service. Now, I think I had met Hal, but I didn't know Hal. I knew of him. I knew what a wonderful man he was. And I went to this church that was packed full of people. And I heard these amazing stories. And I actually, sent Becky a letter afterwards telling her how I have never been to a service like that. It was a celebration of his life, but it was like so uplifting and so moving. And I walked out of there thinking, man, I want to be like Hal. I already want to be like Becky, but I want to be like Hal too. And it was just so touching and so moving. And then I went to the little area where they I guess they call that the fellowship hall or whatever, and they have all those tea sandwiches and punch and stuff set out. And I sat in a chair, and the person that had brought Becky, of course I can tell you who that is, that was Denise Nagy. So Tibor and Denise were there, and I visited with them a bit. And I sat in a chair, and I watched people start to line up to greet Becky and to, express their condolences. But also these were people that were mourning because they loved Hal too. Not as much as Becky, but they loved Hal too. And I watched Becky, the pastor's wife. And I watched someone with so much grace and so much courage greet every single person with love and comfort. And I knew how much her heart hurt. And it wasn't just a role she was playing. I knew it because I knew her. I knew it was so genuine. I mean, I don't know Hillary Clinton, but it felt genuine. It felt like her admiration and what she was doing. I feel like the fact that she did it shows that it was genuine. But I know Becky. And I know how hard it is, and yet I'm watching this amazing woman who had given to me generosity of spirit, so much support and encouragement. Becky was always that woman on the ladder turning around and reaching out to others. So I called Becky yesterday. I hadn't talked to her in a while, but I called Becky yesterday. And I'm like, hey, I got the last minute, I'm going to be speaking, and I'd like to talk about you. Is that okay? And from the moment she picked up the phone, she started to encourage me. And I wrote down a few of her words. She said, oh, Sylvia, that'll be such a gift. I'm like, well, I hope so. I hope I can get enough out to be meaningful. And she said, I remember that study we were in together. And it was so life-changing for me. And she said, I wanted to go there and not be a pastor's wife. And you guys did that. It was such a gift. And she said, just tell it like it is. And it's not an accident that you're supposed to be up there tomorrow. Wow. Wouldn't it be great to every time you need some encouragement to have a Becky in your life? And then I wrote down the name of this book, and I'll tell you what it is because it must be very meaningful. She said, you need to read Mending the Heart. So there's a book recommendation for you. Now, I thought about from the tradition that I grew up in and the scriptures that I read, and I was very familiar with this one, and I wanted to share it because I feel like it's so perfect from John 15:13. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. And there is so much in just that short little verse. There's no greater love. There was no greater love than for one woman who the moment had passed her in front of the entire world, who could have just curled up and said, "Oh, I'm not going out there. It wasn't me." No, she so bravely walked out onto that stage and cheered the other woman on and encouraged people to support her. To me, there's no greater love than that. And in my life, there's no greater love than knowing the Becky. There is no greater love. And I know that you all have people like that in your life. And I would just encourage you to recognize, be grateful for, and to recognize those people and to thank them. And then even more so, I would encourage you to be a Becky. And if you're a woman sitting here this morning, be a Becky. Be that person on the ladder that turns around and lifts other women up. Now, the good thing about when I speak is it's usually relatively short. So I see the clock back there. I'm doing okay on time. That is all I really wanted to share with you this morning. But I do have something special for you, because not only did Becky give me permission to share her story, but she came to support me. And it won't be hard to figure out which beautiful woman in the lobby is Becky. So if you are so fortunate to meet her, you're so lucky, because I love Becky. And thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing your Sunday at Aldea. Bless you all.